there have been so many unintentional consequences of attempting to cross a culture and try to do something that you think is good. And many times we've done damage. And so it may be to go back to learn.
Hello, welcome again to Why Are We Talking About Rabbits? That's this podcast that tries to look at the heavy things in life, but a little lightly. Old world, new world. That's the Enlightenment, what happened to us, who we are, and how it relates to all these old things. Stuff where, I don't know, there's a lot of craziness happening in the old world, but sometimes it really helps to educate us about our own craziness. This is WAWTAR. Why are we talking about rabbits? Rabbits are those things on the internet that keep popping up and then running down holes into darkness that really don't help anyone. And this today is a conversation about missions. What is a mission? What is a missionary? And today to talk about that, we bring on Rob, Gailey, Monty Lynn, and Derran Reese, who've written an amazing book called Development and Mission. I think you'll like it. Thanks for joining us on WAWTAR. First of all, meet Monty, Rob, and Derran, who've written this crazy good book called Development and Mission. And so the reason I'm so excited as the WAWTAR guy, why are we talking about rabbits, is because I think people think we're doing mission work in First Things on some level. We're always told that, y'all. And then I always think, I don't know if I want to do, I don't know. I always say no, and then yes, and I can't decide. And then you all wrote this book. So we're going to talk about your book today and super excited. So say hi, Monty. Could you just each introduce yourselves, where you are right now, and just give our listeners a context for where you are and who you are. So Monty.
Hey, John, thanks. And we really appreciate being with you today.
Thank you.
So Monty Lynn, I live in Abilene, Texas, and work at Abilene Christian University. I'm actually a business teacher, and but have passed through life through various phases in social work and international development and a variety of things. So that's me.
Great, Monty.
Hi, I'm Rob Gailey. I teach at Point Loma Nazarene University in San Diego, California. And I also direct a Center for International Development. I've been here for 17 years. Prior to that, I was with World Relief, and before that, the Microcredit Summit campaign, and have served in the Church of Nazarene as a pastor and as a missionary. And so my background also, even though I teach now in the business school at Point Loma Nazarene University with an international development major. So we have students who are studying this topic. So, and thanks again, John, for having us on as well. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll echo that. Thanks for having us. I'm Derran Reese, and I'm at Abilene Christian University as well, across the campus from Monty. I'm our director of experiential learning. I also teach courses on global mission. My family, we served as missionaries in Thailand for 7 years, where we also started a business and ran that. And then I've also worked some time in congregational ministry, and as well as with the International Rescue Committee doing refugee resettlement. So that's my story.
Yeah. So you all come with a lot of experience, and then you bring a book. And so when you bring a book, I mean, I think in our society, that's expertise. I mean, who does that, right? Who sits down and does all this? Who puts all these words on paper without some expertise? So tell me why you wanted to write this book, and I can throw it at all three of you. Maybe Rob, you can take this. Why this book in 2021 or 22?
Well, it came out. Yeah, it came out in 21. But it's actually something that Monty and I started talking about when we were part of the Accord Network, which is the Christian Relief and Development, a network of organizations doing poverty alleviation work through Christian organizations. We both were attending that. We had connections and knowledge of each other and had collaborated on a few things. But we just started talking about the desire. I wanted to look at the ways different theological traditions within the Christian tradition, right, had approached poverty alleviation and how they could learn from basically a lot of the work that the secular world had been doing and learning about poverty alleviation. And I thought much of the church was ignoring or not paying attention. Right. And then Monty came along and said, hey, I've been wanting to talk about the history of compassionate ministries throughout the church structure. And so we started collaborating together. And actually, Monty's written a second book alongside the book we co-wrote that also deals more specifically on the history. And so I'll let Monty share a bit of that as well.
Sure.
Yeah, and I would jump into since we were early in conversation, Rob and I, it's hard to miss today that knowledge is siloed and that we all know little bits and pieces. And in our own experiences, we've been places where we thought, wow, that what they're doing seems like it's 40 years old, and people have learned lessons, 30 years ago, why this approach doesn't work. And yet the people who were out there doing things were thinking they were pioneers. And I saw that over and over again. And I saw that in myself, things that I didn't know about and I wanted to know more about. So I think there's a strong history of activism among Christians, at least modern day Christians. And yet I think it all starts with us. I think the beginning of this book starts with us and our intentions and admitting our own biases. And even as we wrote the book, there were times, even toward the end, where we had to ask ourselves, what biases do we have that are coloring what we're saying? And so it's a process of examination. Paired with this desire that when you watch the news and you want to do something to make a difference, to be active, how can you be honest with yourself and keep learning, knowing that your knowledge is siloed, and yet also be active? So what I think at least was in my mind as we began writing was, how can we draw on some of these pools of knowledge that seem separate, that don't always connect, and yet are all really rich, deep wells of perspective that can be helpful when doing anything in a global context.
And may I just add, that Monty and I, when we were discussing this, we're like, one, have come out of the practitioner world. Monty's really has expertise in this historical look. We're like, we really should be talking to missions pastors because that's the target of the book, right? Is people who are wanting to go out, make a difference through the church. So we invited Derran, and his input in collaboration has just been such a beautiful thing. And it's just been wonderful to have that. And I would also say that when the book came out many years ago by Brian Fickard and Stephen Corbett, When Helping Hurts, many churches opted to say, well, if helping hurts, then I'm going to stop helping because I don't want to hurt anyone. And we're like, no, that the intent of the book was to say, you can help in a way that really helps. And we felt that When Helping Hurts really helped explain the reason for not doing harmful things. But if we could write a book that was kind of proactive and hopeful, that said, here's how to do it well, not from our own expertise, but listening to others and seeing what's going on and what's working well, then we can hopefully provide something that churches can latch onto, and Christians who want to do something can join in and do something, or not only Christians in general, but anyone who wanted to take this and learn from it.
So Derran, one of the things in the book is this notion about the whole point in some ways is human relationships, right? And there's an imperative that we create relationships. And that's one reason I wanted you on, because we're in the same business, y'all. Now, I would like to get into how it differs somewhat, but there's not much difference between what First Thing is trying to do. So tell us about this reordering of human relationships. How do you see that when it comes to missions in the book?
Yeah, well, I think it really starts with how you understand what the gospel is. So coming from a Christian perspective, that's going to shape what you do. How do you envision the gospel? And the way we talk about it is that the gospel is that really is that Jesus is Lord and that God is making all things new. And what that entails then is that God is about restoring and renewing creation, humanity, and relationships between humanity and God, with each other. And so if this is what God is doing through Christ, then what mission is participating in this reordering of relationships, as Paul says in Ephesians 2, that he's creating one new humanity out of the two, talking about Jews and Gentiles in that context, but he's making one new humanity. And I think that's what we're thinking about when we're thinking about even poverty alleviation, is that this is not just material poverty, but poverty in a sense of brokenness. And so how relationships are so key within, maybe vulnerable communities, but also for those that want to help, thinking about this is not just, just technical expertise that you go in and put in some programs and things work, but it's actually putting relationships first, where you say, okay, people in this particular community, they actually know what they need and they know what their assets are and their strengths. And so saying, hey, we'll come alongside you, but you lead the way and we'll try to help guide where we can. But it's really putting that relationship at the forefront, and not coming in as the ones with all the answers. And now you just kind of do what we say and things will go well for you.
So that's why, okay, I literally just pitched what we do. Now, here's the trick. And this is one of the questions that I really wanted to ask. So it comes at a perfect time. So listening's part of that. Now, for folks out there who are just tuning in, what are they talking about? Well, there's this concept in history, and you all write about it, where poverty alleviation is not necessarily also mission work. You can actually separate it in history, where mission work was just getting people to confess Christ, or getting people, something like that. But now you all have integrated this poverty alleviation. So let me ask a question to any of you, but feel free to jump in. Listen, partner. So that's first things. Just go and listen. Spend 6 months to learn the local language, not the colonial language, the local language, like Mayan, Quiche. Partner. But then you all talk about evaluating impact. So if there's going to be a poverty alleviation part of this, then the Western world wants to see impact. How do you all do this? Like, how should one evaluate that poverty alleviation, a mission thing, a mission hope, is also making impact? This is a trick, and I want to hear how you all think about this.
I'll take a run at it, but I'm going to lean on my co-authors to help me out too.
Sure.
There's an old phrase that I grew up with, and that is that as Christians, we're called to be faithful, not effective. And I get the spirit of that, and that is that sometimes you can live and labor and not see any fruit from what you're doing, that fruit being no sign that you've even been there, or that anything is happening that you would identify as desirable.
Right.
And yet you're called to be faithful. I get the spirit of that, but I think too often we're not transparent enough with our efforts. We're not accountable enough with our efforts. We're not honest enough to ourselves with our efforts to contribute to the world. And so if you take the best of both the faithfulness and the effectiveness, I think the effectiveness, at least the spirit of it, is to do those three things: to be transparent and accountable and honest. So we're willing to scrutinize, if you will, or to reflect upon, maybe is a better phrase, what we're doing and what we intended and what we hoped. So whatever those words that fit the situation. Without that, I think we have no moorings. We're living, we're relating, but if there's a desire for that relationship to grow in a particular direction, then much like being with a partner, there may be a desire. You can be together, but there may be a desire that together there's a kind of well-being that emerges.
Right. And it looks like something. It has
it looks like something.
Yeah, you can
and
touch it.
There may be parts of that relationship that are working and parts that aren't. Without some type of quote evaluation, we simply keep running in those same ruts. So that's, I've used too many words to say that, and I'll see if my fellows have some other insights. But that's the start, at least.
Yeah, John, you mentioned earlier when we were talking offline that you have children, right? And so do I. And I think each one here in this group has. The thing that drew me to even poverty alleviation in general as a Christian was the number 40,000 kids dying a day from preventable causes, not from tragedy, from disasters. There are things that can be prevented that you and I benefit from. And that number has dropped from 40,000 kids when I was in college to about 16,000 a day. Sorry, 40,000 a day to 16,000 a day. And to me, there's no parent in the world, around the world, that has the love of the child that wants to see their child die, right? And so to me, that's a very easy thing we can track, are less children dying. And I think the church should be uncomfortable, and any human being should be uncomfortable until that number gets down to zero, right? That if there's a preventable thing, that we should be doing all our efforts. And you don't do that by just assuming it will happen. You have to do it by measuring how many kids are dying, and you have to see why are they dying, and you have to figure out how to stop them from dying. Now, maybe if that is a very new world thing, then that's the difference in some ways that I feel a very strong call to. So that is what I've been driven by because of the parents' love of a child. Like, I don't think people who have lost children are like, oh, well, in Swaziland, where I grew up as a missionary kid, now Eswatini, they used to record every cow that was born, but the child wouldn't be recorded with the government until after they're past the year of age. They wouldn't even give it a name because they were likely there was a more than 50% chance that they would die than live. And so that to me is a big difference in terms of now they can expect their children to live. And that love is a powerful motivator.
So I wonder then, does that imply, I don't know if there's an answer to this, some type of universal assessment index where, because I was listening as an old world, I'm trying to old world, new world that, and I did feel new world, because in order to get the proper evaluation, then you have to do the proper sort of, you have to cover whatever part of the world you're working in with a net that allows you to measure. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult. So I'm not against that net, that rational net that says, here's the numbers. We studied it. We measured it. I'm not against that. But my question is if you don't have the proper net, the proper evaluation tools, then you might not get the proper answers, which may render some project irrelevant, when in fact, there's all this payoff that's spiritual there, where you think you got the numbers right, but actually maybe the scientific process wasn't proper. And so now all this spiritual payoff that you can actually feel on the ground is not being rewarded because you have a poor measurement system. I wonder about that. Do I sound crazy, or is that a danger? That's a danger in our work. But then the other problem is, then how do you assess?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Derran.
Well, I was just saying, no, I think that's a great point. I think that's where it is challenging. I think a lot of our book, when we're talking about evaluation and assessment, is really focused on when you've zeroed in on a sector of development or sectors of development, and you know where you're at, what you're trying to aim at. So another example would be like if I'm working in the area of like modern day slavery and trafficking, and we're in about preventing trafficking. Well, that's something, if that's what we're trying to do, then I can assess whether less people are being trafficked after our efforts, right? But does that mean that person, that community, or those people in that nation, that region, are doing well, or we might say experiencing the fullness of life? Well, that same measurement is not going to measure that. So I think it is important to know what you're measuring and saying, this is what we're measuring. We're not saying we're measuring something else. And so I think that's helpful. So then when you get to that bigger question of, the Christian language might say like experiencing shalom, right? This like abundance of life, right? Well, there are people that are, where the Western world, we might say, is saying, they're suffering. But I've been around people that are in extreme poverty and experience life with more joy and hope than people otherwise. So if I measure that, if that's what I'm measuring and saying this is the totality of well-being, then yes, I have missed it completely. So I think it's important to know what you're measuring and evaluating, being clear about that, but not saying that means then something else that you're not measuring.
So is it both and? It's you need the measurement and you need the wisdom, right? That's what your book says to me. What I like about the book is it's really, and I highly recommend this, guys, Development and Mission. You can find it in our links. Is really the first half does everything that just makes my heart sing. And then the second half does everything that I really, I don't know if I want to dig into, but it's the exact stuff that I need because of my weakness, because I don't want to measure in that way. When I read the second half, it's the practical part that allows me to be better at the first half. And the first half, when you read the book, you'll see it's really the theology and philosophy of what a mission should look like. And then it's how to do it. And it's amazing. And then, but the how to do it for some people, myself included, it can't be the first part for me. Does that make any sense? I think you all would agree with that.
Yeah, I think you would. I'll just throw in to say, I think you can't do the measurement part without taking seriously what we try to lead with. And that is you have to listen. It has to be a participatory approach where you're not setting the agenda for some community that I just show up in, right? So if I'm coming with preconceived ideas of what we're going to do and how we're going to measure it without ever listening, then that's a problem. But once you're there, because I agree with you, go and live, learn the language, learn the culture, listen. And then once you're there and you start implementing things alongside people, then you develop those ways. Okay, what are you wanting? What are the needs here? What are the opportunities here? Now let's think about measuring. But you're right. If it's come in with some formula, then you're off to a bad start. And I'm glad you picked that up on that in the book, that we're really pushing that to say, hey, let's get out of this colonial mindset of we've got the answers and you now have to look like us or something like that. And so, I feel the tension that you're expressing.
Yeah, sure. That's right. And I appreciate that. And I'll just say this last point in this, and then we can try another question. But for me, and please comment on this, the post-enlightenment world, which we call New World, and I joke that it's light people because that's the whole play on the notion of white people, but it's not white people, right? It's a way of thinking that tends to be Northern European. So that's the joke. But it produced a ton of wealth, very low mortality rates, but also incredible amounts of atheism, which is ironic, right? Like that, the only truly atheistic societies in the world are born out of that kind of system that likes to measure things. So I'm not saying it's bad or good, but it is ironic on some level. Europe has done well, but they're pretty atheistic. So what do we do with that? That's pretty wild, I don't know.
Yeah, I would echo. I don't know if I'll hit that well or not, but to echo something Derran said a minute ago, evaluation happens at the appropriate level. So it might be a top level with Rob's example. It might be a community level or just between two people. So whatever's the appropriate level, but I guess I would throw in too that evaluation can be seen as formative or summative. And so the summative is like, okay, how do we do? Draw a line, add up all the numbers, let's see what the total is. But formative is let's reflect on what's happening here.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's reflect on how healthy are we? How healthy is this society? How healthy is this community? What's the level of well-being among us?
Yeah.
And so that's also evaluation, and anyone can lean that direction, and not the other direction when that's appropriate. So
yeah, I
would say it's not simply drawing that line and summing the numbers and saying, okay, that's the sum total of our efforts.
Well, I think for y'all in the book, it's something like transformational development does both. So tell us what transformational development, what is that?
Well, we wanted to take the notion of holistic mission, which is something very familiar with Christian organizations, to say that you're not just going and seeking that people proclaim the name of Christ so that they can get into heaven, right? Like the holistic mission is that you care about the whole person. But then there's also this notion of that people in, again, the secular world may be focusing on global development as a form of getting people out of poverty and saving people's lives. And that we try to marry those notions to say there's a part here where Christians can learn to help care about the people's lives, the real experiences of their lives, right? Like that they don't want to suffer, even if they are necessarily having challenges in their lives in a way that even Derran was referring to, like that they can have deep joy and happiness and peace in the midst of suffering. But in general, they probably don't want their children to die, or they don't want to be debilitated sickness, right? So to find ways in which we can address those things in a way that treats the whole person, including their spiritual livelihoods. And I would say, in kind of response to your previous question or your previous comment, is that yes, there's atheistic notions coming out of the New World, but there was a lot of baby sacrifices coming out of the Old World, right? Like in terms of things that they didn't care about the livelihoods of people, and they would enslave people, and then all this. And I think of also the notion that the idea that you could have a historical culture that didn't care about another culture, or didn't care about if you followed the notion of missing women. There's 200 million women that should be born in the world that aren't born because they either or are no longer alive because either they were aborted or they were given less food or less medical care because the parents wanted just the male. And that's something that, that's old world. That's part of something we all grew up in, but that's, or not us grew up in, sorry, that we our trajectory of our past, our ancient past, even in our cultures, had that notion that we sufficiently focus on males or whatever. And that no longer, I think, bodes well, right, for anyone. And I don't think that's what Christ is about, right? So if we get back to the essence of Christ, that challenges me to say, what do we learn from the New World that can help make us all better humans? So,
yeah, in some ways, the dichotomy is false. This old world, new world idea. I think I like to use it because it makes us all think twice about what we've inherited, which is probably not a bad idea, right?
Not at all.
But I always find I can't reject it. It's of me. It's like when I come back from Sierra Leone where we were, I'm really happy to be home. The whole immersion in the other culture teaches me about how to be better in my own, right? On some level.
And so, John, really, that's what that transformational part of this term, transformational development, is talking about, is that we're transformed. The people we're with are transformed. We're all changed together, but it's not a one direction mission. It is a two direction exchange. And so we're all equals, and we're all learning together, and we're all exchanging, and we're all being transformed in the process.
Do you all think there's a movement in, I'm just going to say Protestant, because there's a different flavor in Orthodoxy, and we can get into it. In the Protestant mission movement, I mean, the late 90s, when I was in Peace Corps, I was actually working in the Georgian Republic. There was a certain flavor to a Protestant mission, and it was pretty clear what it was. And I experienced it both in Africa and in the Caucasus. And I didn't like it. It was transactional. It was really transactional. A lot of people show up, come to our meeting, get this food, hear this message. And so I know you all know that. Do you think your book is a part of a pushback against the type of mission that was alive in culture that may be less alive? Is that part of the book, pushing back against an idea that took form in America?
Yes. Is that a good answer?
Sorry, it's a leading question, but
I think you're right on. So I'm trying to think where to go, because yes, I think it's a push. And I think, what I would call kind of modern or even recent Protestant missions, I think there's been a lot of correctives to that in places like, if you look at like integral mission, particularly coming out of Latin America, right? So this is, that was started in the 70s. And, movements like that and others are correctives to what you're describing, but yet the legacy of that coming, I agree with you, actually coming post-Enlightenment, that legacy lives on. And so we're trying to, push against that using, a term like holistic mission and transformational development to say, this is not that same model of, showing up and saying, hey, we have something to say to you, listen up, and then we'll move on. And honestly, to go back to your thing about old world, new world, I do agree with you in that, An example of this would be even from a theological perspective, where I think so much of the Enlightenment shapes how we do mission, and in that when we do this kind of dualism of the spiritual and the physical, and the political and personal, and heavenly and earthly, all these dualisms and dichotomies, well, then you got to choose which one you're focusing on. And Protestant missions has mostly, not all, but mostly said, well, yeah, well, then if that's the way the world is, then we need to we're worried about souls, and we need to worry about going to heaven. Right. And so that dualism shapes your theology, which shapes your practice. And so mission looks like, well, yeah, I know I'm supposed to care about whether you have food or not, but really I'm just concerned about your soul going to heaven. And that's what we're pushing from a theological perspective. We're pushing against that to say, well, one, just philosophically, that's problematic, and we could get into that. But theologically, that's not what Scripture says and what the gospel is about. And so, but hopefully, by pushing in theological ways, it shapes the practice to where we are kind of resisting, if you will, what you described a moment ago.
Gosh, there's so much richness in that. This is what I don't want to talk more than y'all. I'll make this a question. Okay. So where our organization struggles is in acquiring the funds through the grant process, because we start with listen, partner. And then I'm just telling y'all, and please just rip this apart. What happens is the identification of a local person who has something to offer to the community, though the identification of a local partner that has something to offer to the community. In other words, a human who lives in the highlands in Guatemala who knows exactly what their village needs. The identification of that person for me is almost everything. It's almost everything. Now, what happens with that person? Well, what do they need? And then you start to download their needs in your language, meaning the language of, the rational, savvy grant finder person, me. Once you've done that, this is what I don't like. And now let's deliver even a small little amount. Let's call him Jose. Let's deliver 20 grand to Jose. Why do I have to go back and see that Jose did everything proper with my 20 grand? This drives me nuts. Well, should I be driven nuts by this? Because we did 17 months to find Jose. We trust him. That work's already done. And now let Jose be free. The problem is my donor back here is going to make me go and evaluate using a Western mentality that allows him to feel good about his donation. That's the part that drives me nuts. Should I be driven nuts, or should I relax about that?
Well, I think a couple things. One is certainly are the approach that people take. I mean, there's two things I would say is one of the reasons why we promote randomized control trials is that it avoids this is saying, what are you doing that has impact? You're talking about an individual. We're talking about communities, right? Okay. Like if you engage in a community and you're doing something that you think is good, at the end, whether it's Jose doing it or someone coming from the outside into the country as a volunteer or as an employee, you're looking at the totality of your intervention and saying, has the society been better at whatever, again, the community has said we want to be better at, right? As a collaborative listening process. So yes, that's not an individual saying, we're going to trust them with the money and do whatever they need to do. The other thing is, and we mentioned this a few times, is Give Directly is a new organization that's got millions of dollars, and they're basically taking cell phones and transferring up to $1,000 a year per year to certain families that they've identified as impoverished. And they're saying, let's track what they do with the money. And it's totally up to them to do. So it's not even just Jose, it's everyone in that community getting that grant, that $20,000, like 20 people, right? And so we say, and they're using randomized control trials to say, are we making a difference in their lives? And they're listening to the people to give feedback to say, what did you do with the money? Did it bless your family? Did it help your family? And things like that. And by the way, Give Directly is not a Christian organization. It was not founded by a group of Christians. There is one person who there is a member of faith who's part of it. But the idea is that that's where development is moving. And that's the secular world is saying cash distribution. Yeah. And so what we're saying is we should be learning about that. Maybe the church, and here's one example. When we were in Malawi recently, we had looked at a place where we used to, and I was talking to the people on the ground, there was a flood because of a storm, and people were, facing hunger because of that. And historically, our denomination, Church of the Nazarene that I'm a part of, we would buy the food in the capital city, truck it down, figure out all the transportation costs, and then distribute bags of rice and a certain amount for each family for 6 months. We decided to switch that up, and through Canadians, the Canadian group that funded this, and said, give cash grants and let them have for 6 months just cash, distribute cash every month, and let the people go out and buy the food in the local community nearby and boost the economy. And that's what I'm saying is we're learning about that aspect from organizations like United Nations, World Bank, research firms that are secular, and the church doesn't pay attention to that generally. The Canadian donor was paying attention, so they asked the church, and you would believe the church leaders were like, this is so much better than what we were doing the last hurricane that came through. This is so much better. The people are so much happier and better off and connected, and it's helping the economy. So, I mean, like that, they were forced by the donor to do that. So yeah, your donor is kind of, I can understand as a frustration, but the point is that's what the book is trying to help educate the whole process,
exactly.
The whole process.
That's right. So, that's the holistic part, right?
That's right.
That you all talk about in the book.
That's right.
And again, I'm not against that. It's not in my skill set. I have some of those skills. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. And I respect it. And that's why I love the book. But yeah, thanks for that. I'm sorry, Monty, I cut you off.
No. So I just tag on that, I get your discomfort if going back is to check on Jose. But maybe going back is to check on me, because there have been so many unintentional consequences of attempting to cross a culture and try to do something that you think is good, and many times we've done damage, and so it may be to go back to learn.
Absolutely.
What didn't work. What did I? What did we do in our planning together? What's not worked out that we thought would work out.
Right.
And so again, it's part of a formative process more than it is this summative process or some sort of accountability just of this trusted colleague that you have in one.
Right. For sure. And then tell me about, Derran, are you comfortable with the notion of, because I think some of the early chapters, and I know that you were responsible for a lot of the theology in the book. What is colonialism to you? How does it play out in the work of Christian missions going global north, global south? Like, I feel like sometimes education is colonialism, almost like by definition. What's your take on that in this work called missionary work?
Yeah, that's a big topic, the relationship between colonialism and missions. It is definitely, we tried to keep it at the forefront as we wrote this book, to think about the legacy of colonialism, both historically and still today. And, we tried to, at least I tried to connect it theologically to say, colonialism is this, assertion of power and to assume my way is the best way, and to make others kind of bow to my own desires and views of the way life is supposed to be lived. And that when you think about the gospel, and we use this term in the book, kenosis, that comes from this passage in Philippians 2, where it says that Christ, who though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be held on to, but emptied himself. Wow. And that emptied himself is kenosis. In that, even if this is the gospel, where the God who created everything is coming down to become human, to be a servant, to die on a cross, which is the most humiliating death. And it's in that giving up of oneself that then life is found for the one giving up their life and others around. That's very different than the colonial mindset of saying, well, we want to help you, and we know what is going to look like. So here you go, and now look a lot like us, and you'll be better. That actually, it's this idea of emptying yourself for the other. And so I think a lot of, I mean, whether it's education, but I also say even the idea of wealth and poverty, the way we define that, like that there's this happiness if you can just accumulate wealth, right? Well, that if that's what we're measuring poverty alleviation by, then we're off, we're in some troubled waters. Same with education. If education means the way I think education has to happen, where knowledge is siloed and you got to have a discipline, and it has to be very materialistic and post-enlightenment, that kind of stuff, then you're not going to, that's not the best, but also you're going to miss people, right? If I'm talking in terms that are post-enlightenment and I'm working in a village in northern Thailand, I'm not even going to be able to communicate well. So, it's a colonial problem, but it's also just being able to make a difference if I'm assuming the categories when I go in. So yeah, I mean, I think the tentacles of colonialism, sadly, are vast, and we always have to be paying attention to that.
You all see this too, Monty? To me, it's probably the seminal. I mean, if you look at postmodern thinkers' critical race theory right now, what I feel like it's a reaction. It's just an anger. It's like a chaotic anger at that colonial mindset. And so, I mean, here's 4 white guys on a call or whatever. Derran, I don't know. Maybe you're not a white guy. I don't know, but I think we all pass for a white guy. And one of the things I was asked, what do you do about the white man savior complex? And I basically gave a kenosis answer. They didn't like that answer at all. And there was this big rebellion. The whole conversation went off the rails, and it was super fascinating. And I loved it because I love that kind of stuff. But guys, what I'm saying is it does have to be addressed. I don't think the postmodernists, the folks who just want to rage against the Enlightenment experiment, I don't think they're totally crazy. And so part of our work is designed to try to say, we hear it. But what do you say then to people who say, don't go, just stop? Because that's one of the things that happens. What do we say to that? That gets weird.
I think we address it. I was going to say education is a two-way street, right? In terms of when we find out that people living in poverty say this trade situation or this political decision is hurting us and our people, that we as Christians in the global north need to then be listening, careful enough to say, oh, it's not just a 2-week trip to go help them. When we're there, we're painting buildings and doing VBS for their kids. Oh, we're actually coming back here and calling our political leaders and advocating for and voting for the things that change their circumstances so that they have equality of opportunity. So it's an education. In fact, I would say that part of the book is to help educate the church in the global north to say, if you really care about these lives, as you say you do, then what you do the rest of the 50 weeks during the year is more important as you do the 2 weeks when you go on a short-term mission trip, right? That's the message we're trying to get to say. And how do you do that? You educate yourself to say, what are the policies, the political policies, the economic policies in businesses and governments that are affecting the lives of poor people that we can help change based on our economy and our voice? Like we live in a democratic society where we can actually speak into these things. And if you're staying silent in those things so that you can go on your 2-week mission trip, so that you can do good for them there. And that is the colonial mindset in education and all sorts of things. So it's a two-way street. And that's what we're trying to promote in the book.
Wow. Yeah, that we were naive when we got started, sort of based in the Peace Corps model. Because what I saw was the Peace Corps model was really good. And then it gets really messy. Like in the second year of a Peace Corps, it's just like, what are you doing there? It's messy as heck. And so what we saw is that Peace Corps provided a really nice idea, but then I realized we went as naive in the sense that we were all going to go under and beneath the whole role of government. And you'll never do that. We wanted to get down on the ground, just help people. But then we really quickly realized that the good projects we were finding, this is the whole, our idea is to find them. They're already there in the heart of a person, or even maybe they've already extended the project into reality. But they're going to bump into some political person, like you're saying, Rob. Something's coming where they're going to need something from somebody in power. And you better make friends. You better make good friends with that whole chain of political reality. Otherwise, your project's not going to work. So I like that. That helped me to see, like, okay, you're being a bit naive about just be everyone's best friend. Like, that's not really going to work, which I feel is really important. But so, yeah. And I like the book on that because, again, it's just so rich with both conversations. So that was helpful to me, Rob, what you're saying. And so let's do a couple more. Are you guys up for a couple more? Just
sure. Yeah.
One of the things that's really fascinating for me is I dug into all this literature about mission work as an Orthodox Christian getting ready to put together this work. Now, we're not under a bishop. So in our world, we're not Orthodox. So it's difficult. What I'm trying to say is there's no priest or bishop that runs our show. Mm-hmm. We're really secular in the sense of our legality, but we use an ethos that's Christian, and I would call it Orthodox. Mm-hmm. And so when I hear all these really good mission folks, and I'm talking about missionaries in the Protestant tradition that I've worked with, when I hear them, they use this phrase, the church. It confuses the heck out of me. And now we don't have to get into a theological conversation, but when you guys say the church, how do you come back and speak to the church when there's so many independent churches and networks? And it's such a fascinating way to hear it. For me, I actually hear like a bishop when you guys say the church. So I'm always interested. How do you do this as missionaries in this tradition when you come back to try to educate the church? Is it difficult? How does it work? Who do you speak to?
Monty,
you write a book and then leave it to them to read it and go on with your life.
It's I'm being a jerk on this, but I really want to know. I agree. No, you put this into the world. I love it. You manifest. Yeah. No, I mean, I think on a serious note, I mean, it's challenging, and some level it's just utilizing the networks that you have, right? I mean, there's no, I'm going to go out here and get all these churches to think correctly, as if I know what that even is anyway. But it is challenging. I come from a background, religious heritage it's not just, there's not a bishop, there's not a governing board, there's not a hierarchy, there's not anything. Right. It is it's a loose affiliation of autonomous churches. Right. So how do you do that? Well, you try to, the places that you can speak and have influence on and write a book, whatever it takes, but it's a challenge. But, I think in the book, when we say the church, most of the time we're using that term to mean the universal church. Like, we're talking about God's people in the world. Confessors of Christ, people who like cross Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, whatever. That's what we mean the church, that we're yes, I come from a particular, heritage, but I consider myself Christian in its broadest sense. And that's who we're talking about. Whoever can grab some of these things and run with it, that follow the way of Jesus, great. And even those that don't follow the way of Jesus, we hope that it can be helpful to them. And we want to partner with people like that as well. But when we talk about the church, usually that's what we're referring to. But then when, but you do have to get down to actual like local congregations or a group of people or however that's defined, and say, now, what are you doing? If you're a part of this, 20-member house church or a church of 1,000, whatever that might be, how can you as a community of people engage in God's work in the world and try to steer people in hopefully some positive directions? But it is challenging. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I would add too that we're looking at the different networks, right? So we're speaking just as much to mission agencies that send missionaries through different categories, as well as the Christian relief and development world, to say, hey, this is a resource again, and I've seen the book When Helping Hurts has influenced and impacted so many different churches, denominations, individuals, Christians, non-Christians, that this is something that we're saying, hey, we're hopeful that this provides the wisdom that says this is how you can go about looking for local communities in the local context where you're and listening to them, right? Like that, going on listening tours, inviting them to come speak in your churches in the global north rather than going into the global south and speaking at their churches, right? Like, how do you find ways to engage where, again, you're listening to their heartbeat of what is going on in their world, and you're looking at how is our world in my community impacting their world, and what can I do to make a difference and a change? So the church is the body of Christ, not a specific denomination or church.
Monty, do you ever, in the book that you all allude to this fascinating, it's like a little quiz. I forget which chapter it's in, but one of the questions is, where do you think there's more where are the Christians most emerging? Where do you see the most increase in Christianity? It's in the global south where we're sending missions, that's pretty freaky right there. Like, Monty, how do you make sense of that? Like,
there's so many fronts on which we're kind of behind what's actually happening, and we're playing catch up. But people have said, of course, the count is not possible, that there are more Christians in China than there are in Europe, or more Christians in China than in North America. The center of Christianity at this point is in North Africa, the global center of Christianity. And so that it's not centered in Europe, it's not centered in the United States, just the pure counts of population, the number of Christians. And that simple statistic corrects somewhat our thinking that the Christianity is European or the Christianity is North American. Its roots are not in either of those geographies in the Middle East. And Christian missions happened from the apostles of Jesus, being engaged in mission to India and China, and North African Christians were long involved in the faith and in many ways influenced the Christian faith. Africa has played a large part in Christianity from the very beginning. Augustine is from Africa. And so African Christians, again, we tend to think of Christianity as European or North American. And so, again, it's part of decolonizing our own thinking and realizing the impact that's not new, even though it is stronger today than in the recent past. But this is a long impact of global Christianity in our faith, and we're part of a global church. So if we use that small c church reference that we were talking about a minute ago, this is a global church, and that's part of what connects us in our mindset. So it's not just, do I care for my family or my next door neighbor? We're part of a global church, and we're part of a global humanity. Again, it's just fighting against the colonial ideas that we've all inherited and continuing to try to wash over those with the gospel and allow our thinking to be changed. From rich caring for poor, or American caring for someone in Africa or Asia, to changing that mindset. And that happens through the gospel, but it also happens through a variety of sources that can influence the way we're thinking and bring some correction.
Oh, man, I'll add, one of the things we see is when our guys commit to 2 years, and then we live at the level of wherever we go. So if you're in Sierra Leone, our guys live in mud huts. The ascetic practice of whatever it is, look, if you're used to eating a certain way and then you're eating with your hands out of a bowl, then what happens is that's asceticism for you. That's breaking down who you are. And Monty, to what your point is wow, the power of asceticism toward transforming a soul is intense. You're talking about quickly making an impact. So we always find, and you guys know this because you all lived this, the impact on the person who goes is usually much greater than the impact on the people they're, quote, trying to help. Do y'all find that? I find that all the time.
It is, which is why I say that the responsibility, my life versus Luke 12:48, to whom much is given, much is required, right? Yeah. And so if even the trips that I've gone internationally have benefited me more than the people I actually visited, then, oh my goodness, what responsibility I have, right? Great to then point. Share their story and to change the practices and to speak up and to have a voice to say, this is right, this is wrong, this is helpful, this is not. in the places and circles of influence that I have, which is because I'm the one that got to travel and they have not. I visited them, they didn't visit me, right? And we've had lots of people from the global South in our homes as well, but we got to see a whole lot more when I travel. And so those responsibilities are heavy and hard. And if Christians all around the world who call and claim the name of Christ took that seriously and took the time to educate themselves and then activate and engage and advocate for things, the world would be completely different. The world would be completely different.
I had a dear friend, Bakari Kamara. He's a Manding from Mali. He came to visit me. Okay. And he stayed for quite a while, like almost 2 months, New York City. It was cold. And it's November. And he's meeting his his Manding and Bambara friends in New York, guys I knew. And they're all cold. They're freezing to death. And Bakari is coming back to my, sitting on the couch. And he's like, now I know why you went to Mali. He said, you went to Mali so you could suffer and become better. That's why all these guys went to America, to suffer, make money, and become better. And then I realized there's this double kenosis going on. Like half of American immigrants have come here. They suffer, guys.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
They're emptying themselves so that they can serve their families. Yep. And in some ways, that's the proper missionary model in reverse. We should feel something more than a happy weekend. There's something should happen that transforms us, which I think your book is teaching us on a deep level, which is really cool. So I don't know. We've been going an hour. We can keep going, but I think, can I come back to you all and we do a part 2?
You bet.
I think what's going to happen is I'm going to hear a lot of good feedback because listen, guys, there's this one notion of missionary work, especially among secular people who have rejected the church. And today, I think we started to say, maybe not that. And let's do another one after we get some feedback. All right, y'all. And then let's just talk about what it is and keep having the conversation. What's the best way to get in touch with your book and your work? Is there anything? We should go to school at Point Loma, right?
Well, Abilene Christian.
Christian.
And I'll let them speak because it's their press that published the book. And I'm very, very grateful that they did. So Monty, why don't you share with them how they can?
Well, we're just thankful for the conversation and have enjoyed talking around these issues and we'd be happy to do more of that. But yeah, you can find the book at any outlet and it's in Kindle as well as in print.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate it.
That was, well, let's put it this way. You have 3 folks from something like the Protestant Confession really talking about relationships as the primary function of mission work. Good stuff. I think there's more there. We got to keep talking with them. So Sheni Skagi Marjos, that means to you the victory. That's often said at the Supra, which is a Georgian tradition from the Caucasus, one of these places where a lot of us go to work. And that tradition basically informs us that the number one and most important thing in the world, right, is to stop and see your brother, to relate. So, Nak Fam Dis, that means goodbye in Georgian. Au revoir. Kambufo. See you next time on WAWTAR.